Metal Gear Solid 5 is a weird game. I know, bold statement, a Metal Gear game is weird. But this particular entry is strange for different reasons. For one thing, it's the only Metal Gear game that convinced me to give it the time of day. It helped that I had been watching Giant Bomb's Drew Scanlon and Dan Reichert play through the entire series up to its launch, positioning me perfectly to jump into 5 with all the context, but none of the gameplay frustrations of the rest of the franchise. It's a game plagued by a breakdown of relationships between celebrated creator Hideo Kojima and his former employer Konami, and it's also one of the best feeling video games of all time. Metal Gear Solid 5 gives you a few open world environments in which the bulk of its missions take place. These spaces are littered with outposts and facilities which quickly become your playgrounds. This is a game where the actual narrative is hardly up to par with the rest of the series, being broken and disjointed and ultimately unfinished, but the real stories you tell from your time with Venom Snake are the ones you make yourself. The way in which enemies and the environment react to what you do is amazing. The game is so incredibly flexible, allowing you to approach situations in all manner of ways. I recall a late game mission where I had to sneak past snipers and found myself constantly dying. So what did I do instead? I called in a giant tank, hopped in, and rolled right through, as the snipers could barely touch my armoured shell. Finding creative solutions to problems is one of the best feelings in video games, and Metal Gear Solid 5, with all its warts, is still sublime at giving you a tactile, reactive world to play around in. Super Metroid is great, and I put it on this list a while ago for a reason. However, when it comes down to it, I ultimately prefer its spiritual successor, the game that established the now infamous term Metroidvania, Castlevania Symphony of the Night. You see, despite people so often conflating the term Metroidvania with any game that has progression locked behind soft ability gates, it's actually more rare that we get a game which uses the specific additions made to the formula by Symphony of the Night. This is a game that gives you stats and numbers. You level up and you equip armor and weapons. Symphony of the Night is an RPG as much as it is a Metroid game, and these elements make for a feeling of progression that isn't just tied to larger abilities. It's amazing when you become a bat, of course, but the micro dopamine hits of finding health upgrades, new swords, or just leveling up are equally as enjoyable. The castle of Symphony of the Night is one of the most memorable locations I've traversed in video games, and I've only played the game through once, which should tell you how well thought out it is. It is large, but it gives you the tools to navigate that space with speed. Rooms that allow you to teleport from one side of the castle to another are welcome, and something that Metroid hasn't done till recently with Samus Returns on 3DS. The level design itself isn't too interesting or challenging from a platforming perspective, but like the Castlevania games have always done, it is built more around interesting enemy encounters. The challenge derives from your ability to survive until the next save room. This game is also the rare 2D pixel art PlayStation release, something which rarely happened around the advent of 3D systems, and it holds up so much better than its brethren as a result. This game is talked about with reverence, but my god, does it thoroughly deserve it. As a kid, Pokemon was my world. My dad would come back from Japan and bring me Japanese Pokemon cards. I'd wake up on Saturdays to watch the cartoon, and I eventually was lucky enough to play Pokemon Blue on a Game Boy that was originally bought as a birthday present for my sister. All this to say that my obsession with the franchise was at an all-time high in the lead up to the release of Pokemon Gold and Silver. I remember seeing early screenshots of the games in magazines and fawning over them. I also found a book that documented all the Gen 2 Pokemon before the game had even come out, and I recall trying to memorize all their names early. So when I was on holiday in America in early 2001, and I was able to get these games before their European release date, I lost my 10-year-old mind. I'll say it now definitively. These are the best sequels of all time. There really wasn't a more perfect way to follow up Red and Blue. From the improved art and sprite design, to the new features like day and night, the radio, trainers calling you on your phone, this felt like a grand evolution of the franchise, and had so many memorable moments that stick with me. I was the person everyone went to when trying to figure out the ice sliding puzzles. I remember using the cloning glitch with friends to get access to Celebi and Mew. I even remember spending hours and hours leveling my Feraligatr to level 100 to take on Bally's level 100 Dragonite in a one-on-one battle. It was slightly anticlimactic, to be fair, he couldn't really stand up to the power of my Ice Punch. But all these memories matter because Pokemon Gold was a special game that pushed the boundaries. The idea of returning to previous regions is something everyone still calls for because when it happened in Gen 2, it was so incredible. It's one of those things you hear about on the playground that you expect to be made up, but actually turned out to be real. The towns are distinctive, your rival is a complete dick, and the new Pokemon are some of the best in the entire series. The current generations of Pokemon could learn a lot from Gold and Silver. They redefined a smash hit and improved on a formula that was pretty special to begin with. When Fire Emblem Fates came out, I was really excited. This was the follow-up to Awakening, a game that had revived the series and restoked my love for it. You can understand my disappointment then when I played through Birthright and was not only underwhelmed, I was angry. So many of the design decisions baffled and frustrated me. I thought the new weapon triangle was nonsensical and that the maps were incredibly boring. It was to some degree an exercise in tedium. Even stuff like child units felt tacked on because of the success of that mechanic in Awakening. I walked away from it, not even wanting to pick up the other game it had come out alongside. But after taking a break of a few months, I came back and started Conquest. And wow, what a difference. I think it helped that I had somewhat gotten used to the new mechanics, but Conquest also gives you much more traditional units and classes, which made the transition all the easier. But the thing that this game does better than every other game in the franchise is map design. The varied and diverse objectives that Conquest asks of you are among the best in the entire series. You go from a map where you have to avoid certain pots that have poison in them, to one where doors open and close, blocking off old paths and opening new, to a chase up a staircase as you are hounded by enemies. These ideas are never reused and always make for interesting tactics. Not to mention, the game is incredibly hard. On normal mode, it is by far the toughest Fire Emblem game I've played, and I adore it for that. Maps like Chapter 10 are among the best in the series, feeling perfectly balanced in terms of their difficulty. For the first time in series history, I really had to consider individual skills and abilities, making for some of the most satisfying strategic moments. Yes, the story is bad, and not to hand wave it, but yeah, I'm kinda gonna hand wave it. I don't care, it doesn't affect the game for me, and so I basically ignored it. That is to say that what Conquest does is so good that whatever flaws you want to find can't take away from the overwhelming positivity I feel towards it. A single word, but a powerful one, and one which is now synonymous with the series that got me hooked on the visual novel genre. Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney is a game that I played on the DS back in 2007. Having gone on another trip to America, I picked up a few games: Cooking Mama for my friend Bally, Trauma Center for my friend Ali T, and Phoenix Wright for myself. This was my first experience with a game like this, and I took to it incredibly fast. The writing in these games is so funny and laced with charm. The localization can often be ridiculous, but it serves the purpose of matching the level of craziness exuded by the original Japanese. And it's this craziness that leads to court cases where you are cross-examining a parrot I'm not even kidding. To be frank, not much has changed gameplay-wise since the series first started back on the GBA in Japan. For that reason, I've put the entire series here on the list, as though I do have preferences and games I consider better than others in the series, this is ultimately a single story told over many years and with many different characters. This is probably best represented most strongly in the original trilogy, which culminates in a case that brings together elements of all three games to deliver a stunning finale. The difference between Phoenix Wright and reading a detective novel is that here you are the one solving it all. Yes, you often stumble into adventure game logic that dictates you have to show a very specific piece of evidence at a very specific time that isn't as obvious as it should be. But for the most part, figuring out these mysteries on your own is both fulfilling and validating. It is a series I cannot recommend highly enough and is thankfully quite accessible today, with the original trilogy being available on most modern platforms. I also wanted to give a shout out to the Professor Layton vs Phoenix Wright spin-off, which is amazing as a standalone game and worth trying if you've never played either series. In conclusion, stop whatever you're doing now and play Ace Attorney. Code name S.T.E.A.M. Not a name you'd expect to show up in a list of top 100 games of all time, and yet here we are. I think amongst all games on this list, this is the one that tells you that this is 100% a list made by me. Upon release, this Valkyria Chronicles-inspired tactics game from Intelligent Systems was derided. It was called out for being slow and not giving the player enough information. However, for me, Codename S.T.E.A.M is one of the most enjoyable and intense tactics games out there. With your squad of 4 characters that takes notable names from literature, such as Tiger Lily from Peter Pan and the Tin Man from Wizard of Oz, you are tasked with eliminating an alien menace. S.T.E.A.M literally stands for Strike Team, eliminating the alien menace, a bad acronym I know. One of my favourite things the game does is give you leeway. You don't lock in your movement until you either take an action or get hit by an enemy's Overwatch ability. This allows you to scout out enemy positions and then duck away to hide behind cover. Everything is governed by Steam, a mechanic that lets you move a certain number of spaces and determines if you can fire your weapon. It is also worth saving, as depending on how much you have left after you move, you can potentially catch an enemy mid-movement with an Overwatch ability yourself. It is an elegant system that makes conserving this resource and knowing when to use it all up another tactical consideration. Each character also has their own special ability, like Lion, who can launch himself like a cannonball to reach high up platforms. Yes, there are certain maps that lend to particular characters, and you'll be worse off for not bringing them, but a helpful in-game team suggestion option means that I always had the best possible squad. This also meant that I got to use and know all the unique team members. This certainly isn't a game for everyone, but if you vibe with it, then it's pretty damn special. It seems like I can't escape Fire Emblem on this list. Just like Zelda, you'll see a lot of entries from this series, and that's just because it is unabashedly one of my favourite franchises. Sacred Stones was the first Fire Emblem game I owned, and as a result, it is the one that I have played by far the most. I've beaten both Erica and Ephraim's campaigns multiple times, I've conquered the Tower of Valny and gotten close on the ruins. And I've made all the characters go down different paths with their classes to end up with multiple team configurations. You can even watch a full playthrough of this game on my channel. All that to say that this is the Fire Emblem game I know the most inside out. It has probably my favourite cast of characters, with the best villains in the series. Volta has the most punchable face, and his smarminess is so well portrayed. He's more than just an asshole, he's a smug asshole. It is also one of the easier games in the series, giving you a world map to freely explore that lets you get into skirmishes and go to the tower to grind up not only levels, but support as well. This is also the Fire Emblem that is most defined by choice. Not only do you have to choose which path you'll take and which twin you'll follow, but in a break from series tradition, you can choose which of 2 classes to upgrade your units to. Do you go Paladin or Great Knight, Bishop or Sage, Sniper or Ranger? These choices inevitably lead to a much more diverse team, as in previous games, Cavaliers only had one option. Now you can sport both a Great Knight and a Paladin, as opposed to just having 2 Paladins. It means that for someone like me, who likes having at least one of every class on a squad, this really is a dream situation. The maps aren't amazing, but are certainly memorable, and the story of Leon and his relationship with Erica and Ephraim is some of the most compelling narrative stuff in Fire Emblem history. Sacred Stones is a great game that doesn't get enough love, and I love it dearly. Time for a spicy hot take. Super Mario 3D Land is the best Mario game, period, end of statement. I guess from a critical standpoint, I can recognise why games like Galaxy and Odyssey get all the acclaim. They are big and bombastic, and sure, they are amazing video games, but 3D Land is perfect. I think this was the first game that made me realise how incredible stereoscopic 3D could be, and the way in which it could truly enhance gameplay. 3D platformers are inherently more difficult than 2D for most inexperienced players, as judging depth is a much more daunting task. 3D Land removes that barrier by giving you all the information your brain needs to understand how far away one platform is from another. It is split up into bite-sized levels that are so well suited to handheld play. I remember playing this in my room at university, picking it up for a few levels and watching some videos on my laptop and picking it back up again. Yes, the first half of the game is easy, but it does add challenge with comet medals to collect for each level. And the level design is so varied. You have more traditional side-scrolling levels reminiscent of Mario's 2D outings, but it also sports more open areas that are explorable and call back to Mario 64. It blends both these worlds so well that it creates a new type of Mario game, a hybrid that would then be sequelized in the inferior Super Mario 3D world. The second half of 3D Land is where the challenge lies, and where the game really starts to come into its own. It builds on previous concepts while still being true to the short, snappy level design that makes this such a perfect handheld experience. 3D Land also introduced the series' first good boss battle, where you are less fighting Bowser and more going through a platforming gauntlet while he assails you. If Link Between Worlds is the smoothest Zelda experience I've ever had, then 3D Land is the most frictionless Mario. Its ease of play is what makes it so good, and why it's my favourite Mario platformer. It feels like a lot of my picks for games that land between 20 and 30 are pretty controversial. I guess it says a lot that I can see past flaws when a game does something which vibes with me. So putting The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword, one of the most derided games of all time, this high up my list will probably get me in some hot water, but I unabashedly love Skyward Sword. It really is unique among Zelda games. Yes, it still follows the formula laid out by Link to the Past, but fundamentally this is such a different approach to Zelda. The combat is the most crucial component, asking the player to use motion controls to fight enemies in a very specific way, looking for openings, breaking defenses, and moving the sword with accuracy and precision in an almost dance-like fashion. This honestly led to some of the most challenging but rewarding combat encounters in the series, as often the slices and swipes feel more like a puzzle than anything else. And when my favourite aspect of Zelda is puzzles, you know that makes me happy. The other aspect of this game that makes it stand apart is the incredible dungeons. From the ancient cistern to the sand ship, these are some of the most aesthetically diverse and mechanically interesting dungeons out there. I adore the time stone mechanic and the area where you use it on a boat to sail through clear waters of the past while surrounded by dusty dunes of the present. It is still one of my favourite moments in all of video games. The potential for puzzle solving with this mechanic was rich, and Nintendo succeeded in utilising it to its utmost. But you also have items like the beetle, multi-purpose in design, that can be used to cut ropes, stun enemies, carry bombs, and even scout ahead. Yes, it is linear and separated, and if you don't like the motion controls, then there's nothing I can really say to remedy that. But people rail against Skyward Sword for everything that it isn't, instead of accepting it for what it is. Because if you do accept it, you're faced with a wonderfully designed game that hits so many beautiful high notes. Inside is one of the most singularly perfect experiences ever made. It is staggering how perfectly conceived of every moment is. This 2D puzzle platformer is terrifying and moody. It plays so expertly with silhouettes and lighting to establish a very specific tone that both puts you at unease but also gives you such a coherent sense of the world around you. I love how subtle the animations are, how tactile everything feels. The young boy you control can approach a box from whatever angle you want on the 2D plane, and will grab it in a naturalistic way that barely has you thinking about it as a mechanic, but rather as a real object. In its 3-hour runtime, I never went to a guide once. There were moments when I was pushed to the edge and thought I couldn't figure out a puzzle, only to have my mind blown when I came at it from another perspective and realised what needed to be done. It does that thing of perfectly foreshadowing ideas that later get used in more complex ways. It then twists the ideas, bringing you to a point of euphoria upon divining the puzzle solution. To speak of some of the reasons I admire this game so much would be to spoil what happens near the end, but suffice it to say that it does one of the most bold things I've seen in a video game, and then not only keeps going, but starts to build even more ideas around this twist to once again put a spin on what puzzle solving means. It is at times grotesque and at other times beautifully serene. It is complete in its vision and executes it about as perfectly as can be done in video games.